Hi, everybody. This is Silvio Canto in Dallas, Texas on Sunday, June the 1st. Welcome to the month of June. I don't know if that's good or bad. The time seems to be flying in 2025. Tonight, we're going to be chatting with our good friend, George Rodriguez from South Texas, and we're going to be talking a lot about parole and this latest case where the Supreme Court allowed President Trump to cancel parole. So we'll get into that with George in detail. But I want to begin. My good friend Richard in Mexico just sent me a text because I was curious about what was happening in Mexico today. They have an election. This is like an election day in Mexico. And this is part of the new judicial reforms, as they call them. And basically, what it means is that all the judges are now going to be elected by the people. Imagine if the Supreme Court of the United States was elected by the people, for example, or the Court of Appeals, or judges of that political weight were elected by people. I don't think the founding fathers thought that was a good idea. But anyway, in Mexico for years, the Supreme Court had been like here, appointed by the president and confirmed by the Senate. Now they've gone completely, well, as they like to say, democratic. That's not really true, but anyway. So my friend Richard sent me a note saying that people are not voting. They're very unhappy with the whole thing. So I'm going to try to get Richard on one of our videos sometime next week and get more details. We'll know better by the end of tonight or maybe tomorrow what kind of a turnout they had. But apparently it's not going to be what the government of Mexico was hoping for. They were hoping to legitimize this new process with a huge turnout. And that apparently is not going to happen. Well, let me say hello to our good friend, George Rodriguez from down in South Texas. George, you tell me it's hot down there.
Yeah, it's 90 degrees. I just checked. It's 90 degrees. The humidity is really high today. We've had a lot of rain the past week. And consequently, it is very, very humid and hot.
Well, it's 84 here just as we speak. And today, I'm sure it'll get hotter over the next few months. But it wasn't, let's just say, if you were outside for any length of time, it was hot. That's the way it was here. And we are expecting
until October, it's going to be hot.
Yes, until October, it's going to be hot. And that's why we're so grateful that they built a roof on our baseball stadium. There's nothing more difficult than watching a Rangers game in July or August when it's 100 degrees outside. Well, George, I know Mexico is not our primary topic today, but they're having this election down there, and the turnout so far has not been going very well. People apparently are angry with the way this was done. They don't feel they're getting enough information about the candidates. So, I mean, this could be a major blow to to President Sheinbaum if she doesn't get the numbers. I mean, it's not a political. Nothing's going to happen to her politically, except her reputation is going to be impacted because her political party, Morena, has invested so much in this whole thing that if the public doesn't accept it, well, that's not good for the political party, George.
Yeah, and talking to my friends down in Mexico, the Morena party has been trying desperately to dislodge, to remove old-time PRI and PAN political cronies who have been controlling who've been controlling Mexico for decades, and
Right.
removing the last ones out of the judicial system is what their goal is. However, the election, in my opinion, is just not the way to go. Whenever you elect justices, justice ceases to be justice; it becomes political.
Right.
And this is, I think again, it is one of these situations where they think that democracy means this radical, the people say, and then they realize that the people aren't really saying that,
Right.
and it turns upside down. So I'm not sure how this is going to turn out. I don't think it's going to be good.
No, I don't think it's going to be good because, as my friend Richard said, they're not turning out to vote. And yep. I got anecdotal information from other people that people are not voting in Mexico. That was Mexico City where I heard from. My friend Richard lives in the interior of Mexico, but still people are not showing up to vote. Well, one of the things that I want to do today, George, is get into detail about this whole parole program that came down with a Supreme Court decision. As the viewers probably know, a couple of years ago, maybe 3 years ago, the Biden administration used parole to bring in roughly 250, 500,000 people from 3 or 4 countries. And they were given entrance into the United States. And then when they're here, because of the parole that they have, they can look for work or at least get a work visa and work until the judge decides whether or not they qualify, I guess, for political asylum, which is what they're looking for. And it kind of reminds me a little bit, George, of when I came here with my parents, because my dad didn't have to go to a judge to prove that we qualified for political asylum. In other words, the American government, the U.S. government, had already made the decision that Cuba was a communist country, a dictatorship, and so on. And therefore, I, as a Cuban, or my parents, I came with them, we had grounds for political asylum. But if you have to go to a judge to prove that you have to or somehow qualify for political asylum, that doesn't make a lot of sense to me, George. So you have a lot of experience in this topic, having worked in the Reagan administration during the days of the amnesty program back in '86. Tell me, explain parole. If you had to do a course on Parole 101, explain that to us, please, George.
Well, first of all, we've got to understand what the word parole means. The word parole means that you are allowing someone to be released, someone that's supposed to be in custody, whether it is a suspect for a crime or a person who is just entering the country that you don't know anything about, someone who has not proven their worthiness of being in the country. So that's the first meaning of the word parole. Now, parole in its usage is supposed to be for individuals, for someone claiming that they are worthy of being in the country, like I said. However, the Biden administration abused it. That's the only word that I can use, is abused it. They used it for millions of people, for at least 500,000 that we know of, being the Venezuelans, the Nicaraguans, the Cubans, and the Haitians. And all of these folks did not go through any kind of individual process where they voiced in some form or fashion what their worthiness was, that they just let them in and they granted the parole. Once they were given the parole, they were allowed to roam free in the United States, and in some cases given work authorizations. Now, the headache that we've got with that is that these people, a good number of them, have just disappeared and we don't know where they are.
Right.
Yeah.
Let me, I not to cut you off, but I just want to, there's a few things I wanted to get in as you were going through to make sure that I didn't forget to mention. Number one, you said we don't know who they are, and that is a complete difference from when we came to the United States.
Exactly. It was very orderly when the Cubans came in. It was very orderly. People were given a list before they got on boats or planes to come to the United States. You read off the list. You knew where they were going, and it was a done deal. The other thing is that they were coming from Cuba, like you said, a valid communist country that was trying to get rid of these folks. Right. So in that aspect of it, there was no dispute.
Exactly. And so when we came in, as part of coming in, we had to wait for, in other words, we had to apply and go through an application and have that application approved. In our case, this happened in Jamaica.
Before you came to the United States, all of that was done.
I'll never forget the day when we were in Jamaica. We were in Jamaica in a special situation there. My dad couldn't work. So we were being assisted by his 2 brothers in the United States who had already left, who would send us money so that we could live there. And anyway, I remember the day when my father came home from the U.S. Embassy and told us that, we've been approved. and that we were leaving
And,
Jamaica.
and once again, Silvio, asylum has always been granted to people that go to a third country first,
Right.
and then come here. And that was
Right.
not the case in any of these folks. They came
No, it
directly
wasn't.
into the United States, and that was it.
But the key is that, just so that people who are watching who are not familiar with the whole story, they knew who we were. We were given, I mean, I was a kid, so I don't know all the stuff my dad had to do, but my dad had to answer a lot of questions before we got here. And then even when we got to the United States, when we got there and we crossed immigration, we got off the plane and we went through customs, immigration, or whatever, we still had to show up. I think it was the next day. We had to show up somewhere where, we were then basically everything was certified. So I bring this up because I'm a little bit familiar with coming to the US from a dictatorship. And in the case of Cuba, there was, at least the Cubans in the 60s and 70s, George, there was a process that was created by the Congress, the Cuban Adjustment Act, that created the process. So that everybody knew what the rules were. And everybody knew that you had to prove certain things. The other thing too, George, is that the Cuban Adjustment Act also favored families. So the Cuban Adjustment Act, if you were a father or mother and kids, you were given special treatment to come. That was the other thing that I remember. But anyway, I wanted to mention that because we had a case here
It was
recently.
completely upside down in the
Right.
past 4 years than that. It was
Right.
individuals mostly. It was folks that had never been screened. It was
That's
folks
very important.
who we don't know what names that were valid, which names are not valid. We have no knowledge of all these folks. And now that's why the parole has been revoked, because it shouldn't have been. It was used by a president in the wrong way. A president reversed it. The Supreme Court said that since a president created it, a president can reverse it, and that's the end of it.
Right. And that's the other point too, that it was done by executive order, just like DACA. It was done by executive order, which means the next guy can cancel it. And it seems to me that, that if President Biden had gone to the Congress and said, look, we've got people from these countries, and let's try to come up with some process by which they can come under certain conditions, that probably would have survived. But in this particular case, there was no process. It was simply, hey, go.
Every day we saw people coming across the border, giving names, and then being released into the United States.
Right. Exactly.
That's the process.
And that's not a good deal to say the.
I wish they would use that process to let me into a Cowboys game, where I could just show up, I would give my name, and then I could get whatever seat they would let me. I'm sure Jerry Jones would support that idea.
And then you can pay later after the game, after you've persuaded the judge that you can get in. But I think that the way the Biden administration did it, there's also another thing too that I believe they were doing, which is very political. And they were also hoping that they could get around the idea that these people were illegal immigrants, and by using
by providing them parole,
by providing them parole, you get around the fact that that they just walked in. So that they were hoping to do that as well. But the whole thing has blown up in their face, and now what are we going to do with these people is a question for.
And that's just about 500,000. There are millions others that we need to deal with as well.
Right, and that's exactly right. That's exactly right. And so it's going to be in a way, it's going to be even more complicated now, because now we got to deal with the consequences of all of this. But I am happy to see that this parole program was stopped, because it was completely a misuse of what the way it should be. Now, when President Reagan did the amnesty, of course, that was people who were already in the country, right?
Right. That was people that were already in the country who had to step forward, and they had to provide proper documentation that, number one, they had been in the United States a certain amount of time. 4 or
Right.
5 years, I believe it was at least, that they had valid names, that they showed that they had been, that their name was actually what it was, what they claimed. So we knew who they were. And then third, of course, that they had no problems with the law. They didn't have any state, local, which was why it was important to have the correct names and correct and valid addresses. And so if they qualified on those those three things, then they could get granted the amnesty. What was very interesting in that aspect of it, Silvio, and we all remember it, was that they were claiming that there were going to be at least 10 million people step forward, and less than 3 million, or I believe it was, no, less than 4 million, about 3 million people actually took the amnesty. So it's not, again, it showed that it's not a question of permanent residence. It's a question of economics. People want to come here to work and to send money home and, or to take advantage of benefits. But it's not about citizenship.
Well, either that, I mean, and also, frankly, in some of these countries, now Cuba was or is a dictatorship. So I can certainly understand that. But Mexico has an elected president.
Yeah,
Nicaragua has an elected president.
exactly.
Haiti has a government. So the idea that, I mean, I'm not saying, look, let me just put it simply. If I lived in Haiti, I would rather live in Miami.
Exactly.
But, I mean, Miami is
even in Venezuela. I mean, most of the people, all the people that came were coming for economic reasons. They were not coming because they were fleeing because they had been involved in politics. I interviewed well over 100 Venezuelans at the migrant center here in San Antonio, and none of them had ever been politically active in Venezuela. On the contrary, they all were coming because there was no work and they were coming to work.
Well, the other thing too that I heard a lot from talking to Venezuelans is that it was a lot about economics, as you say. Like they were saying, all of a sudden their currency was worthless, and the government had gone to a dollar economy. So if you made money, the local currency, then it was worthless. You couldn't get anything. But one thing, for example, I'll tell you about Venezuelans. One thing, and I don't know if you had this experience when you were talking to the ones down in San Antonio, but up here, the ones that I've talked to, and I try to compare their case with the Cubans. For example, one lady said to me that she still had her business in Mexico, a dental office, a dentist. She still had her office in wherever it was, the dentist office. He just locked it up and came to the United States, but it's still there. Another guy said he had property at a ranch that is still there. Another lady said that, well, we have an apartment back home. So all of that was such a contrast to the Cuban experience. Because
I mean, what did your parents have when they came? What did your parents have?
Nothing, literally nothing, as I'm sure you know the story. And everything we had, I mean, they literally did an inventory on your last week there. And they basically said, okay, everything you have, it's ours now. The government would confiscate everything. And you literally left with your clothing and maybe some clothing for a couple of days. And that's it. We literally left without money. That's why, it was important to have, my dad had two brothers here already who were able to help us financially. But that is different from their case because as I hear, I mean, if you can have a ranch in Venezuela that is not expropriated by the government, well, that's totally different than it was in Cuba.
Property.
Because in Cuba,
you have property in a business.
Exactly.
Why are you coming here other than to have more money and more property or business?
Well, I mean it's totally different. It's mind-boggling sometimes when you talk to some of these people. I understand many of them would rather live here, and that's fine. I can understand.
Everybody would rather live here. Everybody.
Yeah, but it's not like the Cuban experience that I remember when we left literally with nothing and had nothing back that we could claim. Everything we left was gone. So, and anything else about the parole? For example, now these people who are here, George, whatever number they are, what options do they have?
Well, I mean, the option obviously is, and my friend Tom Homan, Borders R, has said it, as well as Kristi Noem has said it, the Homeland Security Secretary, is do yourself a favor, leave, and then apply to come back in properly. However, we have, and this is something that we talked about earlier, we have a situation now which is becoming very, very difficult, where American citizens are interfering with the law enforcement. Here in San Antonio, the past 3 days, there have been some arrests of illegal aliens who have violated parole. And again, people do not understand that they violated parole. The only thing they hear is that they're being picked up. And the news media doesn't explain, perhaps because they don't know, or perhaps because they don't want to. But people are interfering with ICE agents. And what I see it becoming is exactly like you had the George Floyd, Black Lives Matter vilification of police officers. You now have it with ICE agents. ICE agents are being interfered with. They're being threatened. The situation also is where they are encouraging. We heard some people at a protest on Friday encouraging the illegal aliens to fight back, to defend themselves. I mean, this is becoming very, very dangerous. Very, very dangerous.
Well, and you're seeing it in San Antonio, other cities as well. I haven't seen that in Dallas. I've not seen in Dallas, in the Dallas area, but I know in Denver they had that problem, I think. In Denver, or in LA, they've had that problem where they're blocking traffic and all
Boston,
of that.
They had it the other day.
Boston, they had it the other day as well.
And in Baltimore, and then you had the judge in Minnesota that actually helped.
Right.
The
Wisconsin, the judge, the Wisconsin judge, I think it was. Yeah. No, that's right. So this whole parole thing was the wrong way to do it. And all you can do is, in a sense, you can feel for these people because they were clearly misled by the Biden administration. So you can have some sympathy for them. I mean, they were totally misled. They were told something that they had to know, that this was not going to fly.
Political puppets.
That's right. So hopefully there can be a resolution, because many of these people are already here and they're renting and they're working and they got kids in school. I mean, what do they do? What do they do now?
Well, that's the whole problem. And I think that was the plan of the Biden administration, was to get them rooted as much as possible, and then to play the sympathy card when it came time to remove them. And now, you've got people very, very sympathetic toward these folks, and it's going to be very, very difficult to remove them.
Well, I mean, they offered money to some of them if they left, right?
They have.
They have, and the flight and the money.
Some of them have taken it.
Some of them have taken. I mean, if they give you $1,000 to go back plus the flight. I mean, that's not a bad deal.
It is. The Democrats have made it more complicated than it should be,
right? And
then the media puts in the sympathy card, and the combination. It's going to create problems for America. Tremendous.
It is. It's going to be complicated, but at least the first step has been taken, which is to eliminate the parole program. And now at least they're on notice that whatever they were under is not going to fly. A couple of other things here, George, before we run out of time. The 10 Commandments, and this is switching now to Texas. The 10 Commandments are apparently on the way, or not the 10 Commandments, but the law that the governor can sign, making or allowing the schools to show the 10 Commandments or to put it on the wall. It's apparently on the way to the governor. Some people are already threatening civil rights lawsuits. I don't get this. If you don't like the 10 Commandments, you don't have to look at them. I mean, you don't have to pray to them. All you got to do is sit there and just sit there. And
what's fascinating to me is how in some classrooms there were Black Lives Matter flags. Ones with black fists on the board or on the poster, or rainbows that said that everybody is love. How is that different than "Thou shalt not kill, thou shalt not steal"? I don't understand why that is offensive, while the other is not.
Well, oh, by the way, our favorite history teachers just put in a comment here, George. She says, "Thanks, Silvio. George is always interesting." So you got the attention of a history teacher there, George. That's our favorite history teacher who watches the show. But no, I agree. Look, if you're offended by the Ten Commandments, well, I'm sorry.
There's something morally wrong, because there's nothing religious about it other than you should, worship God and have no other God, and that's the end of it. Other than that, it's a moral code that it can't you can't go wrong with it.
And it's a moral code that actually had, if I remember reading from the founding fathers, had a lot of influence on them, in the country's history. So I mean, the whole thing, I think, they just hate religion. I don't know how else to say it.
That's it. They
just hate religion.
Specifically, they hate Christianity.
Yeah, and I guess,
but
what's interesting,
Judaism.
What's interesting about this is that actually this is this is Moses, right? So this predated Jesus. Yeah. So this is now another interesting thing, George. You've had these commencement addresses, as they always do in the month of June and late May. University students graduate. It's always a wonderful moment for the family and the students, and I think it's a wonderful thing. But now over and over, you're getting these speeches where the speaker decides that he or she is going to have a moment of attacking Israel. And in one of the universities, the parents were walking out, the students were walking out. Imagine, I mean, just think about this. Your son or daughter graduates from university. You're full of pride. Your kid is full of pride. Maybe it's the first one in the family. It's happened before. And you go to watch your kid get inaugurated. I mean, commencement and all of that, and get the diploma. It's always a wonderful moment. And you have to sit there and listen to some clown, take it out on Israel.
Give their political opinion. Their political opinion. It is, I mean, historically, commencement exercises have been to encourage people about life and your future, not to express your political opinion.
Well, that's it.
What do I know?
Well, you're smarter than they. But here's the thing. When our number 2 son graduated from SMU Law School, the speaker was none other than George W. Bush. Of course, his wife, Laura, has a connection to SMU. So he came to give the speech. And look, he was not president. He was already ex-president. But, he had the whole crowd laughing and basically inspiring people, telling stories of some of his days as a student. But I mean, he turned it into a wonderful thing of inspiration for these kids.
Exactly.
He had fun. And I thought it was a great speech. And I thought it was George W. Bush in a very human way. Okay. And that's what these things are for. I mean, they're not supposed to be
supposed to be downers. They're not supposed to be an exercise in getting angry, or being disturbed, or being upset. However, these liberals, in my opinion, are people who are angry, and so they want everybody else to be angry like them.
Well, I think you're right. About that. Well, last note tonight, George. Governor Walz, our favorite governor from Minnesota, is apparently running for president because he went down to South Carolina and he's doing, the visits to the early states that potential presidential candidates do. So he went down there, gave a little speech. He was trying to inspire the crowd. He says, we have to get tough with Trump, this kind of thing. Look, George, I don't think a lot of Democrats were very impressed with Tim Walz. I mean, I don't think he really, I don't get the feeling that a lot of them want him around in 2028, George.
What I find interesting is our topic last week about the Democratic Party reaching out for men. And here, Tim Walz,
he's supposed to be the inspiration for that.
That's it. And he specifically went to South Carolina to talk to the men, to talk to Southern men.
Right.
So he goes down there, and while he's down there, on Friday or Thursday, Joe Behar on The View made the comment that it's a waste of time for the Democratic Party to reach out to men.
That's interesting.
I think what needs to happen is that Tim Walz needs to sit down with Joe Behar and the women of The View and either straighten them out or drop out, or he needs to drop out. Because
my guess is that he'll drop out eventually, because I don't think there's any foundation for him. But the point you made about the
never
Democrats,
know with the Democratic Party.
well, you never know, and you never know about the situation too, because they may be in a situation in 28 where they may feel more convenient to simply burn one of the candidates than to, because some of the new faces come in. But you never know. Well, it's too far away, honestly, 28. But it's just interesting to have this man running around trying to be the tough guy, the tough guy. I'm going to get the male support because I'm out there telling people we got to get tough with Trump. No, that's not going to do it. That's not going to do it. But anyway, the people he's talking to are, the men that in that audience are probably pretty liberal already.
Exactly.
So I mean, he needs to be adding more people. Well, and I think that it's comical. It's comical what's happening with the Democrats, and they don't seem to be. A new poll came out, by the way, about the Democrats that is really devastating on them and their future prospect. Now, before we celebrate that poll, I just want people to remember that these things can change rapidly, and you cannot. Yeah. You gotta play like I've always felt that in politics or in life, you got to play like you're a run behind. You never want to assume victory, because when you assume victory, then you become President Thomas Dewey, who was defeated by Harry Truman in 1948 because he thought he was going to win because everybody hated Truman, and Truman pulled out the victory. So you don't want to be, like Dewey, who lost when everybody thought he was going to win. But I do like the Republican chances right now. I hope they can get this bill through the Senate. I think they will. And then after that, they got to get very serious about cutting some of these government programs. And they got to get very serious about eliminating some of these departments like education and so on.
Let me tell you. In fact, I remember when Reagan came in, we had a book that the Heritage Foundation had put together, which is very, very similar to the one that the Trump administration this time put together, regarding the list of unnecessary programs and spending projects that were there. And it was incredible. I mean, it is incredible. It was incredible in those days. I would imagine it's ridiculous at this point.
Yeah, well, that's one of the reasons I've always felt we have to have a line item veto.
Yes.
Because a lot of those, I mean, if they're not going to do away with departments, then they got to give the president the line item veto.
Exactly.
So that the president can
manage. At least, in the case of Reagan, one of the things that he was attacked on was that since he didn't get the line item veto, what he was doing was ignoring and zeroing out the budgets of the, or just not working, letting the those agencies work. And Congress wouldn't allow that. They gave them the money. You have to do something with them.
I think they call that pocket veto, where you put it in your pocket and you don't. Yeah,
it was
all right.
Yeah.
No, you're right. But they, that's going to be after they get this budget bill. Or not really a budget bill; it's a reconciliation bill. But once they get this done, then they got to focus on many of these programs in the federal government. Yeah, and they have to start cutting deeply. Well, George, thank you so much for your time as always. And I guess you and I have another date pending, and we'll get together sometime next week. But it's always great to see you.
We'll see how things are at that point.
Yeah, we'll cross that bridge, as they say. All right, George, have a great week.
Thank you.
All right. Our good friend, George Rodriguez in South Texas, talking about a few things, but this whole thing with parole was so misused by the Biden administration. And these people who were brought in under this program, parole program, were so misled by the Biden administration. And I mean, you can certainly understand their anger. They were brought here thinking that they were going to be able to stay here or at least see a judge. And that obviously, if that happens, well, I don't know what's going to happen. These poor people, we're going to have to figure out some way of of settling their situation. I think if many of them accept the offer of going back and maybe applying for asylum when they get down, maybe that's a better way to do it. Well, thank you for listening. This is Silvio Canto in Dallas, and we'll talk to you later. Bye-bye, everybody.